Okay, welcome everybody. We are now in open session. Welcome to anybody watching online, and just remember to mute your phones, and just a reminder that recording and photography of the meeting is not allowed. Okay, so members, we have got 4 apologies now.
Yes.
So we've got Stuart, Sinead, Claire and Philip.
Yes.
Any declarations of interest to declare? Okay, thank you. So in terms of chairperson's business, the Commission for Victims and Survivors, just a follow-up from our evidence session, I'm just going to refer you to page 6 of your pack. And just to advise that the Commissioner for Victims and Survivors, Mr Joe McVeigh, wrote to me to thank the committee for the time during the oral evidence session on the 11th of February this year. The Commissioner would welcome the opportunity to return to the committee in the future to provide further updates in relation to his work. And just want to seek your agreement to schedule an oral briefing with CVS in the committee's forward work programme as part of our September to December session. Agreed?
Great.
Okay, thank you. So 3.2, Interfaith Clerical Abuse Survivors Research and Recommendations, and I'll refer you to pages 3 to 5 of the table pack. Just to advise that I was forwarded correspondence from representatives of the Interfaith Clerical Abuse Survivors group that they sent to the department regarding the public dissemination of the research and recommendations from the TO commissioned research into clerical sexual abuse. And just to advise that junior ministers have offered to meet with the representatives, however to date there hasn't been a meeting scheduled. Just to seek your agreement to note this item and agree to write to the junior ministers to ask that this meeting is arranged at the earliest opportunity. Agreed?
Great.
Thank you. Okay, item 4, draft minutes. I'm going to refer you to pages 8 to 17 of your pack for an updated draft minute of the meeting on the 25th of February 2026, just to see if you're content that these are a true reflection of the meeting. Okay.
Great.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so matters arising. So Northern Ireland Assembly Services Data Protection Policy, and I'm going to refer you to pages 19 to 32 of your pack. Just to remind members that our meeting on the 12th of February this year, the Head of Legal Services explained to members that actions taken by Assembly Commission staff in relation to the PSNI inquiry and the role of the Legal Services in these actions. During that meeting, the Head of Legal Services agreed to provide a copy of the Assembly's Data Protection Policy. A copy of the policy informing the corporate response to this matter can be found on pages 21 to 32 of your pack, and I'm just going to seek your agreement to note this item.
Yeah, just before we move on, there's nothing in this explains the delay, and this was something I was keen to explore on the day where there's an initial date given. I think it was June, and then there was September, and then the information was released in December. So what we've learned from this is that the Assembly Data Protection Policy requires a Form 81. Could we get a timeline of when that Form 81 was received? Is that what we're talking about from June, that the Form 81 was received? Was that September the Form 81 was received? There's still a grey area here, and I would also be keen to know that once this information is gathered up, is it screened by somebody trained in data protection, or does the police get the raw data that we hold, and on that basis then before it may be released in future, do they screen it and take out people's personal data? And I have one further question on the back of, if you could shed any light on that, would be much appreciated.
Do you want to take that?
Yep, that's no problem, Chair. In terms of the timeline, I think to get that, Philip, either yourself or the committee would just need to write to the Commission, who would then provide I imagine a full timeline of that. In terms of the material that was sent to the PSNI, obviously I did send that material. That material was all in the public domain before I sent it. Therefore I sent it as we had it as the raw data, because there was nothing to redact, because it had all been put into the public domain anyway earlier to that.
So there was no screening, essentially it was a case of what information that was requested was released. Are you clear when the Form 81 was received?
I don't have that date to hand, but I can come back to you on that. I don't want to give you the wrong date. In terms of screening, before the information was sent to the PSNI, it did go through our legal services. So legal services, I sent the bundle of information to legal services, who looked at it, then came back to me. I then sent it on to the PSNI. As to what the PSNI then do with it, again, you would have to ask them that. I don't know.
So the information that you sent and submitted was the raw form in which it was passed on to the police?
The information that I sent is all I sent. So what the PSNI have then done with it, again, I'm sorry, you'd have to ask the PSNI that. I haven't had any further contact with them about it.
So and my final question all this is, and it's maybe more to the chair, have you sought any advice from legal services? Because obviously this involves yourself, and this is all over a private meeting you had between yourself and a political witness, namely Michelle O'Neill, before she came to committee. Have you sought any legal advice from legal services about chairing these meetings where this is being discussed?
No, why would I? And first of all, let me just correct you, it wasn't a private meeting. There was the interim permanent secretary, there was the clerk to the committee, there was the private secretary, and there was the minister's, First Minister's special advisor. So please don't try to insinuate that there was anything untoward in terms of that meeting. There was a minute produced that was signed off by the permanent secretary that I had no issue with. So,
was that shared with yourself prior to being
no,
composed?
and I have. This is the third time you've asked me this, Timothy, and I'm going to tell you for the third time. It was not my minute. I got it at the same time as other people.
Were we not told that a draft minute was sent to yourself for approval?
No, why would it be sent to me for approval? Why would it be sent to me? It's not my minute.
Sure.
Go ahead, please.
Sorry, Timothy, you finished?
Yeah, it just was on the legal services aspect. I'm just concerned we've got to a point where you've been sitting in the chair in a number of meetings where this has been discussed and it involves yourself, and I was just wondering, just looking clarification, if any legal advice was sought on that point, but that's okay.
Why would there be? Okay, go ahead, please, Carol.
So, Timothy's obviously a right to raise whatever he wants,
Yes.
but it's the same issue getting raised again. In relation to what you did with information, if that question is posed again, I would advise you to get the head of clerks here, because I feel this is the second time and I almost feel like you're getting interrogated and I don't feel it's appropriate. So just want to put that in the record.
Okay,
Could I just clarify? I wasn't aware that it was Nick was releasing the information. I put the question to the chair of the committee and it was Nick was the one that was responding.
He said that the last time.
You did say that the last time. I think you're just keeping to try and going over and over old ground. Okay, so we're going to move on, members, to item 6 then, the oral brief. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. Of course. So the Equality Commission NI, apologies, witnesses will be with you shortly in terms of future oral briefings. So I'm going to refer members to pages 33 to 35 of the pack. Just to remind that just prior to last week's meeting, the clerk emailed members correspondence from the Equality Commission in relation to Supreme Court judgment in the For Women's Scotland Limited against the Scottish ministers in response to the committee's recent inquiry about when the Commission will be able to provide an update to members. Just to remind you that at last week's meeting the committee agreed to defer consideration of the inquiry draft final report until after this oral briefing with the Equality Commission. So I'm just going to ask you to note this for now.
Could I make a couple of comments on this, Chair,
Sure.
as well, please? So the Equality Commission say they're being as transparent as possible, but they're not coming in front of this committee. It was the Equality Commission that put their own guidance out into the public domain, and they're not prepared to come here to stand over it. But the most concerning points from the letter on page 36 of the pack, where they make clear that the Assembly Commission policy is based on outdated legal advice and legal guidance. So that's the policy in here, that whatever way you want to identify, you use a toilet of that identification. So essentially we are operating a trans policy that the Equality Commission are now saying that this guidance was produced by a government department that no longer exists, that may be outdated, that essentially we are operating in breach of the law. And I'd be really concerned. We're operating a policy in this building that's illegal, it's open to challenge, and it's simply because the Equality Commission do not accept biological reality. A man should go to a man's toilet, a woman should go to a woman's toilet. So we now have this information and we need to pass it on to the Assembly Commission to ensure that they are going to review the policies that they have, and namely the policy they have regarding the trans toilets in this place.
Timothy, I think we're going over old ground again.
No, but we have got something from the Equality Commission,
Yes,
and I believe this committee has to act on it, because this opens up, and the Equality Commission are now recognising that we are operating in a way that leaves Stormont open to challenge, and we need to ensure that the Assembly Commission are fully aware of that.
And have you written to the Assembly Commission on
No,
this?
it's up to this committee. I believe to share the information that's been sent to this committee, but if you give me permission to share what's in this, I will happily share it with the Assembly Commission. So I'm seeking your permission
Well,
to
I have
share
no
what's in the
problem.
committee pack.
I'm going to bring Carolyn first and then bring in Pam. Go ahead, please.
So once the minutes are done, it now goes on the website. So I don't think you need permission to share it with from this committee.
It's a committee pack.
Yeah, the letter itself won't go onto the
Okay.
website. The fact that it has been noted, if the committee or a member of the committee wish to share the letter, the first thing the committee would have to do is go back to the Equality Commission to ask permission for that, because the letter was sent purely to the committee at this stage.
Well, then I
But-
see, just to cut to the chase, I think that's probably what you're better doing. Come back to Equality Commission and then it refers on to the Commission, the Assembly Commission.
Could I ask for permission to share the letter from the pack?
You need to go to Equality Commission.
Yeah, because sorry, Chair, because the letter was addressed to the committee, the committee would just have to get permission from the Equality Commission that the letter can be more widely shared. I can do that on behalf of the committee once
don't
we've
agree.
received that.
I
Pardon?
don't agree.
You don't agree?
No, I
I'm
don't
sorry.
agree. Sorry, because
Sorry.
we've another commissioner waiting to present a report, and we're talking about toilets. So if Timothy wants to send this on to the Assembly Commission, he needs to go to the Equality Commission to get their permission to share it.
Okay.
So that's
The
my
committee's
proposal.
not giving me permission.
Timothy, I hadn't finished sharing. I told Pam that I would bring her in next. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. No, I'm happy enough that if this committee is going, if that's going to be a proposal from Timothy, that we actually do get whatever permissions are needed in order to send this letter to the Assembly Commission for their information.
Well, I'm happy with that. And I think
And just to be clear, this isn't just simply talking about toilets. This is talking about Stormont being left open to challenge, and what we have got in the letter in front of us realistically opens the door for somebody to take a judicial review against this place. And I think we have a duty to ensure the Assembly Commission is well aware of that, and we do
Okay.
what we can within our power to put that right.
okay, I've just said that I agree. I'm happy for the clerk to go and seek this permission. I think that that's the majority of the members are in agreement with that. Could you do that?
No problem. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay, but I suppose I do need to correct the record. We agreed as a committee that we wouldn't take the oral evidence session the last time because we didn't feel that it was right that we would be able to do the full scrutiny work. So again, I just want to correct the record on that. Okay, so item 6 then, oral briefing from the Commissioner for Survivors of Institutional Childhood Abuse, and I'm going to seek your agreement for Hansard to record this session.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. So members, I'm going to refer you to pages 37 to 40 of your pack for the clerk's brief, pages 41 to 49 for the written briefing, and pages 50 to 66 of your pack for a copy of COSIGA's consultation on supports and services. So I'm going to welcome to the meeting Fiona Ryan, Commissioner for Survivors of Institutional Childhood Abuse, and Denise Morgan, who is Head of Policy, Research and Engagement also at COSIGA. So you're both very welcome back to committee. Members, our guests, we couldn't believe that it was actually that long since you'd been in front of us, I suppose, because we've seen you in other forums since then, but we really appreciate the time and effort put into the written briefing that you sent. It's very comprehensive. So would you like to go ahead and make some opening remarks? Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to come before the committee today and to update you on my work and the work of my office. It's greatly appreciated. When I spoke at Memorial quite recently, I said we all had a duty of thanks to victims and survivors. If it were not for the tireless work of survivors to have the abuse they experienced recognised and responded to, then the truth of what happened to them would not have been acknowledged. They performed a massive public service and we owe them our gratitude, and I would like that to be recorded again to say thank you. Since I established the Office of the Commissioner for Survivors of Institutional Childhood Abuse in December 2020, we've engaged with almost 1,300 individuals and responded to almost 1,700 queries and cases. The impact of child abuse and institutional child abuse can be lifelong and profound. There is no substitute for the voices of survivors, which is why we undertook the research consultation, which you hopefully all have a copy of, with victims and survivors on their physical and mental health needs, their experiences of services and their concerns for the future. I want to thank the 126 individuals who share their thoughts and experiences in the consultation, our advisory panel for their insights on the scope and rollout of the consultation, as well as colleagues in VSS, WAVE, Advice NI and TEO. What has emerged is a stark and poignant picture of the physical and mental health needs of victims and survivors of historical institutional child abuse. Chronic physical and mental health conditions are widespread. Victims and survivors tell us that almost every facet of their lives has been affected. We also know there's an increased risk of further re-traumatisation for survivors as adults from domestic and sexual abuse. Victims and survivors are highly reliant on general health supports, especially GPs, yet at the same time they've told us they're often reluctant to seek medical help. Specialist service and community supports play a crucial role in their well-being. I thought it would be useful to share with you a response by Professor Anne-Marie McAlinden of Queen's University Belfast, who's an acknowledged expert in the area of justice, on her reading of the findings. These recommendations are very important, timely and welcome. I've seen some of this coming through in interviews with survivors over the years, but it is great to see it consolidated in this way with concrete, evidence-based, holistic proposals across the spectrum of complex support needs and drawing on a wide range of survivor experiences. This includes the often neglected dimension of the impacts of abuse and intergenerational trauma, which is known to exist but is very under-researched, especially in the Northern Ireland context, as the report notes. I would offer that our findings demonstrate that survivor support needs are only going to increase as survivors age, and that survivors will need general and specialist supports throughout the course of their lives. I would like to bring to the attention of the committee the recent stats from the Victim and Survivor Service. 641 individuals access support in the first 3 quarters of this year. That's 641 individual survivors of institutional child abuse. 141 have done so for the first time. This is clear evidence of new individual survivors coming forward for support. I would also like to leave the committee with the following messages. We need to recognise and respond to survivors of child abuse and resist re-traumatisation. To do that, we need to reach survivors so they can make informed choices about what they want to do. Communications matter, and communications require a sustained and strategic approach. We need to ensure that this choice is a real one and that there are services and pathways to support survivors if they choose to come forward. Survivors of institutional child abuse have repeatedly highlighted the need for lifetime supports and services because the impact of abuse can last a lifetime and even beyond, as we know from transgenerational trauma. Survivor needs are likely to increase with age. There can be no sunset clause on services to survivors. Survivors need to be there. Services need to be there for the lifetime of survivors. The intersectional nature of institutional child abuse must also be recognised. Many victims and survivors of historical institutional child abuse experienced harm in additional settings, underlining the need for a broader, integrated and trauma-informed response. I would also offer that the negative impacts on health and well-being experienced by victims and survivors of non-recent institutional child abuse are also likely to be shared with other survivors of other forms of child abuse. I've come to this committee before and highlighted the lack of data in Northern Ireland in relation to the incidence of child abuse, including child sexual abuse. 1 in 5 people contacting my office are outside of my statutory remit. The Executive Office has a central role in shaping how Northern Ireland responds to the legacy of institutional abuse, including institutional child abuse, not just historically, but as survivors age and their needs become more complex. The words on the memorial to the victims of survivors of historical institutional child abuse state that it is a reminder to legislators when systems fail. It is a warning and a reminder as well not to fail the victims and survivors again and not to fail children now. I trust that today's update will support the committee in its scrutiny role, and I look forward to continuing to work with you to ensure that the interests of victims and survivors of historical institutional child abuse remain visible, supported and listened to.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Lee, have you anything to add? Not at this stage, thank you. Okay, so again, thank you for your report and the work on it. It's very, very insightful, and I want to just focus at the start on specialist therapeutic support services. And so I was speaking to a gentleman who was here at the plaque memorial unveiling, and he had asked about even psychiatric assessments and then treatment that would take it up to like tier 4 in terms of mental health service access. And I'm just wondering, to what degree do you feel that the support services there at the minute are good, but that maybe some more sort of medically led treatments might be needed?
I think first of all, the Victim and Survivor Service are the experts in this space, but I would observe that in terms of the supports that they provide, the responses you will have seen in our report is that there's generally a high satisfaction level with the Victim and Survivor Service and indeed their community partner, Wave Trauma. I think and I've met that gentleman that you spoke to as well, and in fact my colleague Denise has engaged with him, and we hope that we've found a solution for him.
That's good.
But I think
just wondered how prevalent that.
I think you're outlining, I think it's a really great question to ask, because what we're talking about here are, to be fair to the Victim and Survivor Service and its community partner, when a survivor's needs are sufficiently complex that they go beyond the step care model being provided. I think what I would like to see is, and this is something that has come out in the report, when there are additional and complex needs, that there are clearer pathways for survivors, and indeed the regional trauma network is opened up to victims and survivors of historical institutional child abuse.
Okay, well that's maybe something we can pick up. Thank you on that. And I suppose the sustainability of these services going forward, obviously the legislation has them quite time bound, and I'm just wondering to what degree you're linking in with the Department of Health in terms of their health strategy. And I suppose you've given me one of the examples that can have a bit of sustainability going forward.
It's a great question, and I think, you know, even the most cursory reading of this report will say to you that victim and survivors' needs are only going to increase as they age. They're not going to decrease. And I think that's important. In terms of the Department of Health, I've written to the Department of Health and I've sought a meeting with the Minister for Health. I think what we are hoping to do is build on the good practice that is already around trauma-informed care in relation to victims and survivors interfacing and engaging with the health system. But there are some very stark findings in this report. You know, we're talking about a serious reliance on not just specialist health service, which I will speak to in a moment, health and wellbeing services, but also to the general health service. You know, I mean, 54% of people said to us that they're primarily reliant on their GP. And at the same time, we have people demonstrating and showing us that there's a real marked reluctance to engage with, I suppose, the medical system, because they are afraid of disclosing, they're afraid of not disclosing, they don't know what the response is going to be, and also the very real structural challenges that we are there with the health system at the moment. In terms of specialist services, I am unequivocal in saying that I appreciate the funding pressures and resource pressures that is facing wider services in Northern Ireland. But I'm the Commissioner for Survivors of Institutional Childhood Abuse. And so I'm saying there cannot be, would be my recommendation, that there is no sunset clause on specialist services to victims and survivors. We know that child abuse can have lifelong impact. We know that trauma can reoccur, and we know that it does. And so consequently, we need to ensure that services are there for survivors when they come forward. I would highlight for the committee that the inquiry's terms basically went up to 1995. That means if you were a 15-year-old in 1995, this is where my terrible maths will come out, which are likely to be in your early 40s now. So we're talking about a lot of life ahead of people. And again, as we know from trauma, it's often when someone becomes a parent, when someone becomes a grandparent, that issues that they maybe have held come up for them.
Well, thank you. So I contacted your office about this in the past, and I think it might be useful to sort of take it out into the public domain, and that's that issue around victims and survivors having to keep repeating their story, their background to healthcare providers, housing officers. And I suppose when you think we as a committee have been dealing with mother and baby institutions troubles last week, I think it was, and we'll be moving into clerical sexual abuse. And I just wonder, is there any model or process that you think would be useful for our public authorities to stop people having to keep repeating their stories?
I think it's a really good observation, and obviously it's one that's been shared with us quite a bit as well. I think one of the challenges is when you are engaging with services where there's a turnover in staff, and people then are being asked to recount their experiences again. Survivors have shared with us that it is re-traumatising. So certainly when I'm given the opportunity to speak with providers, to speak with service providers both in the statutory and community and voluntary sector, I will be highlighting the need for trauma-informed practice. And I know it's something that we use all the time, you know, the words trauma-informed practice, but I'd be asking the question, how is that lived in the service? For example, one of the key, and I know we're all very familiar with this, the key elements of a trauma-informed approach is, you know, we recognise the widespread prevalence of trauma. So, for example, survivors shouldn't necessarily have to disclose in order to get access to services that they need. But if they do disclose, that it should be in a safe, respectful, trustworthy environment. But it's establishing those safe practices and pathways, and that may require reflection, picking up on what you're saying. But I don't think there's any, from what I'm aware of, that there's any one off-the-shelf model that we can bring down. It's about a trauma-informed approach and reflective practice.
Okay, thank you. So you mentioned in your report, and again, I think we've heard from you before, around the need for a prevalence study, and I know it's something you've been campaigning on and
Yes.
trying to raise awareness of, and I suppose if you can just give us a wee bit of an update on that and your aspirations in that space.
I know that I've been speaking to you for a very, very long time about the need for prevalence. This is based on a number of reasons, not least of all my own challenges as a commissioner. I'm now coming into my 6th year as a commissioner for survivors of institutional child abuse. And one of the key issues for everyone working in this space in relation to any form of child abuse is the lack of data. We really, really struggle in Northern Ireland with having appropriate levels of data. And I do wonder, as we roll out services and provide services, how we are informing ourselves around that service provision. You know, is it sufficient to say, well, we have this number of people coming to the service, therefore that's an indication of need? Well, I would suggest that's part of an indication of need, but it's actually an indication of the number of people coming to your service. How are we to measure the gap of the people who actually need services versus the number of people who are actually able to access services? 1 in 5 people who've engaged at my office are out of my statutory remit, and I've said this before, and engage is a very nice, sanitised term. What I'm talking about are people contacting my office and disclosing the abuse they've experienced as children in other contexts. I can say to you, from having engaged with survivors and engaged again, having met and listened and spoken to survivors and heard from them, there is a huge experience of intersectionality. Many survivors were abused in multiple settings, you know, and the reality is we really, really struggle with getting an accurate picture, and this informs even everything from redress. How many people, the estimates, for example, for redress, they ranged from 5,000, I think, to 20,000 at one stage. But right now, and I would put this question, what do we know about child abuse in Northern Ireland? What do we know about child sexual abuse? The prevalence, the incidents, who were the perpetrators? We have an opportunity, a really, really unique opportunity at this point to find out more, to not close our eyes. If we're going to make the words of this memorial real, you know, we're pledging to, you know, protect children. And I would say it's not just for the survivors who I represent, but it is also outside of my remit for the survivors who often have told me they don't feel acknowledged, but it's also for the children who are and the children to come.
So in terms of any movement within the executive office or the executive as a whole, are you getting any positive soundings in terms of this potentially being commissioned?
I would say that I've had conversations, and I think that the more our voices are amplified, you know, on the reality, because this is not just exclusive to the Executive Office. This is a matter I would regard for health and justice as well. We had a very preliminary ACES report, and I say preliminary, my apologies, in terms of that it is an actual report on adverse childhood experiences in Northern Ireland, which included child abuse. To me, that is a starting point, and that was the reason for using the term preliminary. The reality is that it gave very, very strong indicators that child abuse is, you know, in terms of prevalence, is potentially comparative with other jurisdictions. And again, I would imagine that this is something that politicians and legislators and different government departments would be really interested in knowing, because it informs service provision and policy direction.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Carol, please.
Thank you. So this report's very good. In fact, it's excellent. It's uncomfortable reading.
Yes.
And it should be. But we keep hearing, so the question I was going to ask is around data.
Yes.
And like yourself, I'm conscious because that information is about probably the worst experiences of adults now who were children, but who are still living with that trauma. But the key to this is that, for me, there does not seem to be an overarching piece of work that collects all this.
Yes.
So, for example, because of history, certainly in nationalist and Republican communities, very often no one contacted any authorities when anything happened because of their own suspicions, or because it may have been used against them in a sinister way. So I know for a fact there are lots of people, I would say maybe over the last 5 years, who are probably looking somewhere to go to try and get help. And they're going to organisations who are probably not designed to look at the issue of child sexual abuse. But the thing is, so they're going to their GPs.
Yes.
And they're probably on medication.
Yes.
And I just feel that this is only the tip of the iceberg. So, and even any subsequent reports or research that's coming forward in terms of clerical sexual abuse, and even the latest revelations, we know that even from previous work, should it be through HIA, mother and baby institutions, Magdalen laundries, workhouses, that sexual abuse was prevalent as well, even as a pathway. So what happens, and I know it's probably something that we may need to put to TEO, but what happens to all those adverse, horrible instances? Where does that get captured to get a true reflection of what happened? Because for us to prepare for services, there's still a heavy reliance on the community and voluntary sector.
Yes.
And in my opinion, health and social care are almost doing what to do, some of them doing what to do best. Either you get referred through COMS or you get referred through the adult services, which are under massive pressure. And while the community and voluntary sector is recognised, the funding and support doesn't follow through. And we have a whole group of people who are really vulnerable and need our help, and they're not getting it. So when you have a meeting with the health minister, I would appreciate if that was raised, because that is a fact. But in terms of discussions with TEO or indeed other commissioners, what would your suggestion be in order to ensure that those people who are living with this don't fall, that their experiences are noted, captured, put into data? How would you suggest that happens?
That's a massive question, and I want to acknowledge, the reality of what you shared about survivors. I would have worked, as you know, in domestic and sexual violence before I took up this post as Commissioner in the Republic of Ireland, and I would have been on successive monitoring committees of the National Domestic Sexual and Gender-Based Violence Strategy in the Republic of Ireland. Domestic and sexual violence is very much seen as a gendered crime, and the reality is that while, of course, men can be and are victims and survivors of domestic and sexual violence, we recognise from an equity perspective that women were more likely to experience more severe harm and worse outcomes. And also, on a very real level, children in that context as well. I feel like the answer I want to give you is so massive, because what you're talking about is structural systemic response. I think if we keep pursuing tactical, piecemeal solutions, we're not going to actually give victims and survivors what they want and what they need. And I would say this is not necessarily a small group of people. You're talking about international statistics, which might suggest that it's 1 in 5, if not greater. That's a big proportion of the population. And I want to talk about costs, because people talk about the costs of providing services to victims and survivors. Let's be very clear here, and this is not just me saying it. I mean, we have a British Home Office report that says the vast majority of costs of child abuse are borne by the victims and survivors themselves, both in terms of lost opportunities, potentially mental health issues, employment issues. You know, we're actually looking at a situation that has a phenomenon. If we looked at this as a public health phenomenon, which is actually what's considered good practice in terms of child abuse, and actually said, what is the impact of this public health epidemic that we have? How can we cost this up, and now what do we need to do to address it? I mean, you're looking at basically building a strategy across prevention, protection and prosecution, and then policy integration. I know they sound like words, but you are actually, I do think you need to get that structural systemic response. And if we are looking at, you know, research-informed, evidence-based policy making, then we can start with data. But I want to be very clear here. My recommendation of a prevalence study is not as a, well, we start with that and then we wait for everything else to happen. You know, I want to be very clear. It's about to inform. It is, I do think that a prevalence study would be useful to have, and it is about informing the system. But that doesn't mean that we don't actually look at what services are available to survivors. I mean, I spoke to Nexus quite recently, and the demand for their services, they cannot keep up with the demand for their services. And in fact, if they were to actually go out and fully advertise services, they would be overwhelmed. That is an indictment.
Yeah, but the GPs are referring their patients to community and voluntary service in the community and voluntary sector, because it's the best they can get in the interim while waiting on more specialised psychiatric services or emotional support services. So yes, a prevalence study is needed, but it can't be the only option.
Absolutely, and I agree with you. It is not the only option. It
cannot be the only option, and
No.
I would appreciate if recommendations were made to the entire executive, because the whole area of even just your own remit, but even child sexual abuse outside of your remit is huge.
Carol, it is massive.
It's huge.
It's massive, and I want to be very clear, you know, I mean, the kind of response you're looking for requires, I would suggest, a whole of government response. It requires significant cooperation across departments. It requires will, it requires resources. All I can do is speak from the perspective of, you know, being a commissioner for survivors of historical institutional child abuse, and share with you my experiences in this area and good faith what survivors have told me, and to make in good faith recommendations to you that I think might have an impact. But frankly, you know, there are government departments and there are legislators and there are ministers that have far more influence in this area than I do.
Thank you.
Okay. Timothy, please.
Thanks very much, Chair, and afternoon. Thanks very much for coming along. I suppose you opened with a line, survivor support needs will increase as they get older, and that's something we need to bear in mind as a committee. And that's something that after you leave today will last in my mind, that this issue isn't going to go away. Essentially it will increase as somebody gets through their journey of life. So established in 2020, 1,300 individuals, 1,700 cases. You have mentioned that 1 in 5 are outside your remit. So out of them 1,300 individuals, 260 people that have approached you
Approximately. Yeah.
are not within your remit.
Yes.
Whose remit are they under?
It's an interesting question, because what we have are people describing child abuse in different settings. We have survivors of institutional child abuse who may have been abused in foster care, who were then put into an institution, as you know, and you know better than me, because of the debates that happened prior to the formation of the Historical Institution Abuse Inquiry. Foster care was not included in that inquiry. So you could have, if I could just give you a journey of someone, you know, someone who was in foster care, was in an institution, a children's institution, then was put back into foster care, then was put into the children's institution, and then could potentially have been put into a mother and baby institution. So you're talking about abuse in multiple settings. We have also had survivors come to us for who have been abused and who are telling us they've been abused in school settings. Mm-hmm. Now, as you're aware, in the Republic of Ireland, there is going to be an inquiry into schools regarding child abuse in those schools. So in terms of remit, what I can say to you is what we do, Timothy, is that we listen. We acknowledge, we unfortunately have to tell people that you're outside our remit, and then we signpost to what services are there. But in answer to, is there a Commissioner for Child Abuse? No, there's not. There is, or who they go, obviously, if they're disclosing details that require PSNI engagement, we will obviously refer to the PSNI. And, you know, but we would never tell someone what they do. We signpost to services because we're very aware of our own boundaries and our own levels of competence in that situation.
Mm-hmm. Essentially, there's a gap there. And you have mentioned about other European countries.
Yes.
Does Northern Ireland need a child abuse commissioner?
I think that is a recommendation and a consideration for the government departments and for the legislature. What I suggest and what I've said to you is that I do think there needs to be a public conversation about child abuse. Mm-hmm. We know from the ACES study that was carried out, we know from my work, that there are significant levels of harm and that there is child abuse. There is a prevalence, you know, I mean, and that we need to accept the fact that is there, but we need to do the further research. But in the meantime, to pick up on your colleague's point, it can't be used as an excuse for not doing what needs to be done around services and supports to survivors.
So, once again, using your line, survivor support needs will increase as they get older. And I'm looking down through here, and you point out that your office is only funded until December 2027.
That's right.
What's the plan after that? Who would pick up that work if the funding is not continued?
I'm waiting to hear from the Executive Office regarding what their plans are for the Office of the Commissioner. My own term finishes in December next year. I think it's probably safe to say that we've established that there is a need for an office like ours. Mm-hmm. We are providing data, we are providing signposting services, we are providing research, but that is a decision that has to be made, but it is not a decision that's within my remit to make, obviously.
So, if we were to go back to the very start and set up a process again, do you think Stormont has got it wrong in that we have been looking at the box or the location of the abuse? Should it be a case of looking at the abuse, looking at the child, and then stepping through their journey? as you have talked about there, you could be abused in
Multiple settings.
multiple settings. So we are missing out on people, and we are failing people because of that. So would your advice be that from now moving forward, if we are setting up any inquiries in future, we're looking at the child, the victim, and stepping through their process instead of looking at where the abuse occurred?
I think it's good practice to always start with the child, to start with the victim and survivor, and to build out from there, and to look at this child as they work with this child who'd been abused, because that's how you actually understand the relationships that can happen between different contexts of abuse. I think taking that systemic approach is to the benefit of children and to the benefit of victims and survivors. I think the challenge has been that, you know, for example, survivors who were in foster care and then were in institutions, or some variation between the two, have often felt very forgotten. I know that particularly survivors of foster care have said to me they feel very forgotten. I think that is the challenge. Where do we begin when we look at inquiries? But I think by starting with the child and working out from there, I think starting with a building rather than the practices and pathways will mean you will always have, you will always miss victims and survivors, you will always miss children.
Moving on to the prevalence survey, and Paula has already covered some of it. You've outlined very eloquently the need for it, that would help provide data, and that's something you've mentioned. We have a lack of data, a lack of information to back up where the abuse happened. So we have essentially two bills coming through Stormont at the minute. You have the Justice Bill coming back, and then the Mother and Baby institutions that has come through committee stage. Should a prevalence survey be built into one of these bills coming through? Do you feel this sits with TEO, or do you feel this would sit better with Justice?
I think to go back to my earlier comments, this is a whole of government systemic approach that's required. So to be frank with you, do I think a prevalence study is needed? Yes, I do. As to what vehicle will achieve that, that's not for me to comment. But I think whatever will allow us to get to a point where we understand more about child abuse in Northern Ireland, historical institutional child abuse, other forms of institutional child abuse, then that has to be considered and should be actively considered.
Are you aware of any other prevalence survey that has been put into statute that we could use as a precedent case?
I'm not at this point in time, but I am happy to go and look and actually come back to the committee if you thought it would be helpful with that information. I can tell you that there are prevalence studies for example, in the jurisdiction adjacent to this in the Republic of Ireland, where prevalence studies have been used to inform government policy and strategy in this area. And I think I spoke earlier about the National Domestic Sexual and Gender-Based Violence Strategy in the Republic of Ireland. And obviously the prevalence study that was carried out in the Republic was carried out by the Central Statistics Office and provided what's considered a very comprehensive and robust analysis across the population. And perhaps what was interesting as well was that it gave an indication as to changing types of child abuse, child sexual abuse, but also in relation to who perpetrators were primarily, and profile of perpetrators.
On page 7 of the document, or one of the documents, it talks about the partnership agreement, and it's very clear from this is an issue for the First Minister and Deputy First Minister. I would certainly be of the support, or of the view, and I would look for the committee's support, that we would request the First Minister and Deputy First Minister come before the committee on this issue alone, to try and put a focus on it, both on the information you've given prior to today and what you've shared with the committee. I would like to then explore a little bit with you of the publicity and budgets associated with your office. What sort of a budget have you for publicity?
I was given a general resource budget, so I wasn't given actually a budget for publicity. And I think I've gone to this committee before and I've said to you individually, I believe there were missed opportunities, particularly at the start of redress. There were missed opportunities to reach victims and survivors. And when I say missed opportunities, what that actually means is there are potentially, survivors who never got to know about redress or support services. And just picking up a point, which I know I've said to you before, services to victims and survivors of historic institutional child abuse were effectively 9 months after redress. So to give you a very simple example, as part of my office's ongoing, and you would have received these ongoing publicity, which we take out of our own resource budget, rather than having a dedicated publicity budget. When I was over visiting an agency in Britain that provides outreach in the community for older Irish immigrants, I met a gentleman from Northern Ireland, and he said to me, I was chatting to him, and I said, "Have you got redress?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "How are you for services?" I said, "Are you getting services?" "See, what services?" Because he was part of the first group of people that went forward for redress in that 9-month gap. And if I could share something, that I think would be so key and important to ensure that there are services available at every stage of whatever process you're going to engage in. But the reality is that I think there were missed opportunities around publicity, marketing. We can see already that there are survivors coming forward. I think there was this sense that once survivors got redress and maybe some limited services, that they would no longer need to avail of support services. But that is not the case, as we can see from the evidence of the Victim and Survivor Service. And I would suggest to you that there are survivors out there who are either unsure or unaware of their services entitlements. And there certainly are survivors out there who, regardless, I think we need to actually, particularly those in Britain, who are at increased risk of not knowing about their entitlements.
And final comment from myself, a final question. If after December 2027 your office wasn't continued, and I know you're in post until then, but I'm just thinking of the people you support, what would that mean if your service was withdrawn and there wasn't an appropriate support level put in place? What would that mean for the people you support out of the 1,300 individuals?
I think what it would mean in terms of, just picking up on your last point around, say, creating awareness amongst survivors of their entitlements to services, I think that would be severely diminished. The professional network that we've built with survivors and with survivor support agencies in Britain would certainly be impacted. We have a very good working relationship with my opposite number in the Republic of Ireland, the Special Advocate Patricia Carey. We have a network of really, productive engagement with agencies in Britain working across the wider Irish community in terms of welfare. I think that would be at risk. I think I spoke to you before about us reaching out to those agencies in Britain, and because we had so little budget, we actually had to rely on their own channels to and their communications to highlight, to try and reach victims and survivors from Northern Ireland. So I think that would obviously be impacted. I think we've established credibility with survivors. I think this report speaks to the value we can offer in terms of research. One of the key areas going forward would be to take aspects of this report and to go to your earlier points, to do deep dives into those core areas and find out what survivors' experiences are again, and then obviously speak to the stakeholders involved. I'd like to highlight for you the fact that survivors are telling us that they have real concerns about going into residential care as they age. And these are very, very real. You can imagine you've had such negative experiences of being institutionalised as a child, what that will mean for you going forward as an older person. But also I think there's a whole aspect that hasn't even been looked at around transgenerational trauma and the impact on survivors, their families, their relationships. So I think that research capacity would be somewhat diminished as well, So I'd like to think that over the past 5 years that we have amplified the voices of victims and survivors, that we have brought to your attention as a scrutinising committee key issues that are being shared with us, even from the very start. In my first, few months as Commissioner, I brought to this committee's attention
Okay, thank you. Anya, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Fiona. It's brilliant to have you in, and I suppose this consultation report itself, some of the testimony in it is absolutely harrowing, as well as some of the statistics. You've mentioned that you've sought a meeting with the Health Minister just to discuss some of the ongoing health and social care issues. In terms of the housing section of the report, Fiona, there is a lot of testimony within it and a lot of statistics. So one victim and survivor has stated that they have moved house many times, finding it hard to settle down since leaving the care system. It's an ongoing merry-go-round. I wish it could be more normal like everybody else. And a number of statistics around how difficult it is for people to access home adoptions and actually access housing in itself. Have you engaged at all with the DFC Minister on this?
I've engaged with the Housing Executive in the past, but I haven't engaged with the DFC Minister to date. What I wanted to do was basically, I suppose, gather the information, gather the evidence, gather the data, and then use that as a platform to engage with ministers. We have engaged with DFC staff, however, in relation to other aspects of service provision to victims and survivors, primarily I think around welfare provisions, social protection. And I think, Anya, that really highlights, you know, again, the systemic responses that are needed. You know, the reality is survivors exist, as we all do, in relationships with different parts of the state that they interface with. And trying to pick one and ignore the others means you're missing something. So I suppose in the time that's left to me as a Commissioner, I'm certainly going to use this consultation as a platform to have those important conversations, you know, because again, one of the core aspects, principles of trauma-informed approach is that we recognise the widespread prevalence of trauma and we respond appropriately and we resist re-traumatisation. So they're the key points that I will be repeating.
Thank you. And I suppose that piece kind of it replicates or it mirrors the same as health and social care and how that trauma-informed approach is taken. And I suppose it even goes back to the fact that people would have to self-declare to members of the Housing Executive in terms of engaging with housing. And another point I just want to touch on, and I have asked other victims groups about it, is the capita assessment, for example. Have you had any feedback from victims and survivors of how their engagement with that process has made them feel?
I know that survivors have engaged in other assessment processes, and I really need to stress this for the committee. If your earliest formative memories have been unjust authority, and every interaction you've had has resulted in a really, really bad outcome for you, then even if the process is, you know, the most trauma-informed, victims-focused, it's still going to cause massive potential anxiety for a survivor to engage in that assessment process because their earliest formative experiences were that it would be unfair. So I think what we would like to do is, again, have those conversations and explain, which we have done, to, say, some DFC staff as well, regarding just what it's like to be a survivor engaging with the state, engaging with authority, how that might look in reality. So I think from my point of view as a Commissioner, and I have a responsibility in terms of, you know, encouraging the provision and coordination of services, I think having those important conversations is a starting point at the very least.
Thank you, Joe.
Go ahead, please, Denise.
Could I just add a one wee point to that, Anya? Just to say that, you know, as Fiona quite rightly says, it's really difficult for survivors, and I think sometimes having our office to facilitate them in maybe engaging with services, because there can be that trauma around the memories of the first experience and just helping them over the threshold to move that forward.
I suppose to
It's really
clarify,
important.
we don't provide direct services, but what we can do is signpost survivors. But what we can also do is that level of systemic influence. So, for example, we wouldn't necessarily take a case on behalf of an individual survivor, but what we can do is highlight for the relevant service provider or authority, these are the systemic issues that are emerging.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I just have one question that I don't think it's been touched upon. That's in terms of the memorialisation programme. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts as to the next steps, what they should look like. I thought it was really nice atmosphere in the Great Hall at the unveiling, and very much a sense of camaraderie, and so I thought it was a really wonderful event, as I said earlier. But just wondering what would be the next steps in this process, in your opinion?
I said at the memorial that there were survivors who were not happy with memorial for various reasons, and that is a spectrum of reasons. Some people will say there is no apology, there is no memorial that can compensate me for what happened. And then there were specific issues, as you're aware as well. What I advised government, and I offered this advice some time ago, or advised the executive officer rather, was that it engage in a memorial programme. A programme of, I suppose, different types of memorial that would allow survivors to access the memorial that had the most meaning for them. Because, someone can go through a collective experience, but the reality is it can be very individualised to them. Yeah. So I think the more opportunities we give to survivors to say and consult and ask what memorial is most meaningful to you, and then see where we can develop a programme around this, which is what I advocated for, a memorial programme, widespread consultation, then I think that's one of the ways forward, because you can't guarantee an outcome and say, well, we want this or we want a particular form of memorial, but you can talk about the fidelity of the process and ensure that people's voices are heard, and then develop the programme from there.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So I really appreciate your time today and look forward to having you back at committee at a later stage. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, members, will we take a break?
Yeah, we can either go through the actions on this, or we can do that when we come back.
We'll go through the actions first. Okay, do you want to maybe read out what you've got there first and then bring in Carol?
Yes, members, thank you, Chair. There were a number of things that I've noted down that I think perhaps would go to several different places. Obviously, the first one is around trauma-informed care and providing specialist support services for victims, and the Commissioner mentioned that she was in conversation with the Health Minister around that. I wonder if it'd be worth the committee actually writing to the Health Minister as well to get an update on discussions that they have had, or whatever he is thinking to do of that. There's then, on the back of that, also just around pathways for victims and survivors being opened up to allow childhood victims to be able to use those services. So I think that's something, again, that could go perhaps on the medical side to health, but also to TEO, just to ask about that. Then the prevalence study and the whole question around capturing data and getting an understanding of one of the phrases that the Commissioner used was the measuring the gap between asking for the need and the actual requirement for need. So again, the Commissioner had mentioned that FM, DFM, TO rather, health and justice could potentially be involved in that. So again, I wonder if it's worth committee writing to all three of those in terms of prevalence study and just how they capture data and that. And I have a couple more. I think plans to TEO as to what happens post Corsica. So where we end up in August 2027 and what plans they have to continue with the support and the services that Corsica provides. Also, whether TEO have any plans for a child abuse commissioner that you mentioned. That was something, again, that the Commissioner themselves thought was potentially a good idea. And then the only other one I had was around a memorial programme, that whether TEO any plans for a wider-based memorial programme, including a consultation around that.
Thank you.
Happy to take any more.
Yeah, so I just Googled, so There was prevalence studies done in England and Wales, and there's one in the Lancet as well. But I think if we could ask Grays to try and gather all that, and as well look at the Central Statistics Office in the South, as well as, if Grays are going to look, they're going to look at the work of the Special Advocate. See, if you even look at, I can't remember the name of the programme, but it's where young women were trafficked for sexual abuse and were made addicts by people who were using them. I know for a fact that in North Belfast there's at least 3 residential homes that came under the spotlight many years ago because children were disappearing out of those homes, and the suspicion was that they were under the influence of more sinister people. I'm not getting into details, but that's what it was. Now, I have often thought, what happens to them, because nobody is looking out for them. And I suspect that even if you were talking about events that happened 10 years ago, they're now adults, could be 26, 30 odds or whatever. And so there's even cohorts like that. So it's really essential that health, in my opinion, because if you even look at health and social care, health and social services, the family support hubs, the numbers that were captured even in later years, that data, for want of a better term, is there somewhere. And I would just imagine that it may be something that the executive may take on. But I do think the whole issue of, because what's happening now is with a commissioner for mental health, a champion for mental health, we have a commissioner for institutional abuse, and they're all doing really great work, but there's no overarching, even something that each of those commissioners could feed into in terms of data, experiences, prevalence. So I do think it's, raise is okay, but I would like to find out from FM, DFM, on behalf of the executive, if something like that could be taken on. NISRA, I don't know if they're the right people.
I think the other, there's the Commissioner Designate for Victims of Crime, so there's Geraldine as well. So there's
Geraldine Hannah,
Geraldine Hannah, so there's a few. I think you were wanting in, then I'll bring Pamela, go ahead.
Yeah, just on the prevalence survey, and I'm glad Fiona said she'll go away and do some research on it. But I think it's something we should keep in our mind, that we follow up with her
Yeah, I've
in a
noted
couple
that.
of weeks' time. That should we go down the route of putting something like that in the statute with one of these bills that's going through, and I'd said during the session there about, I believe we should ask the First Minister and Deputy First Minister to come on this issue alone. Now, if that's tying in with a future evidence session, I think we should try and double it up, that we have a designated time for this issue and just this issue. That's if we cannot get them to come here additionally.
Yeah, we were due to write actually to FM and DFM within the next couple of weeks to organise a session for obviously the post-Easter pre-summer time. So if members are happy, we can certainly raise that as a specific issue, and again, as Timothy perhaps mentioned, have a proportion of the meeting that looks at that just alone.
I'm sorry, the only other thing I want to raise
Pam
is,
to come in.
sorry,
Go ahead quickly and then
WAVE is mentioned a lot. So, and again, they do excellent work, but where's the resource come to support them and other groups within the community and voluntary sector? A lot of things, a lot of issues, a lot of services are being signposted to WAVE, and they can't cope with all this.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Pam.
Thanks, Chair. I don't disagree with any of the actions there. I was just struck with Anya mentioned the housing piece, and I was I looked it up to remind myself what it is. There's the new Foundations pilot project, which is looking at care leavers and that kind of wraparound support, but so it's in conjunction DFC and health. I'm just wondering, is there a potential for a similar but different model that would suit this circumstance? So it may be worth actually touching base with DFC as well as health, maybe even referring to the New Foundations pilot scheme as an example of that type of piece of work. I mean, there's no doubt about it. All these commissioners and groupings do phenomenal work and very specialised work. I suppose my concern would be that asking for more commissioners, we're having to invest an awful lot of money in different boxes and different pockets, but actually, where do the people on the ground actually get the basic, in particular, health services that they absolutely require? Because clearly, these issues don't die with the people, that the intergenerational trauma exists, and so it's, if we're not dealing with it and we're always looking around the surface and trying to fit people into boxes, I don't think it necessarily works. So my biggest concern would be that overall provision on the ground, that people can access good housing, that they can access the appropriate healthcare at the time they need it and as early as possible. That has to be priority. So I don't know how you react to tick that box, but I think that would be a huge concern of mine, that we keep spending money in very specific ways, but people keep getting left out and can't actually get the help they need. It's okay giving people redress, but if there's no service to actually help them move forward, that's a terrible issue. And I also want to touch on too, Chair, I don't know if there's anything around this, but the Encompass system in health that it is now completely rolled out. What potential is there to use that technology in terms of data gathering? Because that's a story as old as time, talking about the lack of data, and it seems inconceivable that we're still missing so much data in so many ways. Surely we should be using every piece of technology that we've now invested in, and is now there. What potential is there to use Encompass? And maybe that's something to health around that.
Yeah, and that's a good point at the end there, Pam, and I think that links into the issue I raised around the survivors having to keep repeating their story. And again, if there was some sort of central repository like Encompass, where that could be there so that people are aware of the lifelong trauma they've experienced. Okay, I think that, anything else? Are we happy enough with those actions? Okay. Okay, thank you. Members, we'll just take a 5-minute break, if that's okay.
Just have to ask.
Oh, sorry, are we okay to take a 5-minute break?
Yes.
I'd also just have to ask the visitors to leave.
Okay, sorry.
You're
You're going to have to leave the office. Okay, welcome back, members. And we're just going to move on to item 7 of our agenda. The oral briefing from departmental officials on the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls Strategic Framework and its first delivery plan. So I'm going to refer you to pages 105 to 107 of the pack for the clerk's brief, and pages 108 to 111 for a written briefing paper. So I'm going to welcome to the meeting Geraldine Fee, Director of Ending Violence Against Women and Girls Division, TEO, Ryan Somerville, who's Head of Policy and Research in the Executive Office, and Fionnuala French, who's Head of Community Investment, also in the Executive Office. So you're all very welcome to the meeting today, and thank you for giving us your briefing in advance of the meeting. So would you like to go ahead and make some opening remarks, please?
Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you.
So thank you for the invitation to update the committee today on the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls Strategic Framework. And we're very pleased to have the opportunity to provide you with an update on current delivery, future plans and some of the challenges we're working to address. As you know, the EVOG Strategic Framework is a programme for government commitment, reflecting the priority given to tackling violence against women and girls as a key societal issue. It sets out a coordinated approach to prevention, ensuring alignment with wider objectives and cross-sector collaboration. It's imperative that women and girls feel safe and are safe wherever they live, work or socialise. Too many women have lost their lives to violence here, which is a stark reminder of why this work matters. To highlight some of the shocking statistics based on the 2024 Young Life and Times survey, 26% of the females surveyed reported experiencing online violence. 23% reported experiencing psychological violence, and 17% reported experiencing sexual violence within the last year. The principles of the strategic framework have been central to implementation of the first delivery plan, which has initiated a series of actions to begin delivering on the framework's outcomes. Data on the impact of the first year is still coming in, but we know that the programme has been well received by stakeholders, including councils, community groups and other departments. Feedback from the first delivery plan has been overwhelmingly positive, with high demand for grassroots funding and strong engagement across sectors. There's been a positive effect in terms of awareness raising and ability to respond. This approach has been key to the positive changes we have witnessed since the strategic framework began, some of which include delivery of the Local Change Fund, which has advanced a partnership with local councils. The Local Change Fund is progressing across all council areas, with early activity focused on mobilisation and the commencement of local delivery. Early feedback, which to date is based on the results up to the 30th of September 2025, is strongly positive, with over 86% of participants surveyed reporting increased awareness of violence against women and girls, 86% reporting improved understanding of root causes, and 80% reporting increased confidence in how they can help. Delivery of the Regional Change Fund, driven through 8 key regional, community and voluntary sector organisations who have EVOG expertise, has enabled resources and programmes to be developed and delivered across schools, workplaces and communities. For example, student nurses are now undertaking embedded pre-employment learning as part of their degree due to a collaboration between Women's Aid Federation, Queen's and RCN. Feedback on the programmes to date show that 98% of respondents surveyed are reporting an increased knowledge of what violence against women and girls is, 96% reporting a better understanding of what a healthy relationship looks like, and 90% reporting increased confidence in what they can do to help tackle violence against women and girls. The Power to Change campaign, which we developed in partnership with the Department of Justice and PSNI, aims to target harmful attitudes and behaviours of men and boys. It has achieved over 10 million impressions across social media platforms. The Power to Change Toolkit training has been delivered to over 500 teachers and safeguarding officers. The Education Authority EVOG youth panels provided input into this campaign, and through that process developed the Raise Your Game board game to encourage discussion regarding the challenges and understanding of VOG for young people. Phase 2 of the campaign development is underway, and it will target a younger male demographic and tackle misogyny. The Head, Shoulders, Knees and Toes Coercive Control campaign and training initiative has been piloted, and early results are positive. Taking on board learning from the pilot, the campaign is still being prepared for a region-wide launch and rollout. Sectoral groups have been formed in tertiary education, workplace and socialising environments, as well as the Healthy Relationships Forum within education, and we're working towards developing action plans. Work has begun on progress in community-led reviews, including a collaboration with DERA to establish a review of the needs of women in rural communities, ensuring it is guided by community experts. It is being led by the Rural Community Network and the Northern Ireland Rural Women's Network. In addition, work is also progressing on the first stage of the NICS-HR training portfolio, beginning with an e-learning module to raise awareness of VOG alongside an introduction to bystander initiative. This will complement existing and future training materials. These are just a snapshot of some of the key achievements to date, but there remains much to be done. Collaboration is vital, and mainstreaming this work across all areas of policy and practice is equally important to embed a consistent preventative approach to tackling violence, abuse and harm targeted at women and girls. We would, however, like to put on record our thanks to everyone for their input to achievements to date. Delivering across the framework's 6 outcomes is fundamental, and we continue to work on how they are being monitored and evaluated. We have reporting systems in place at local and regional level, and we continue to work with NISRA colleagues to enable us to provide this data in a consistent manner for the strategic framework as a whole, so that we can see how our work is affecting change at societal level. The forthcoming delivery plan for the period 2026 to 2028 will build on momentum and progress established through the first delivery plan, ensuring continuity, consolidating good practice, and will allow for the scaling of initiatives that have proven effective. By deepening and expanding our existing efforts, the second plan will strengthen long-term outcomes, reinforce community trust and demonstrate sustained commitment. Full details of all the key actions within the next delivery plan will be available once it has been approved by the Executive. A formal launch is then expected, with delivery commencing from the 1st of April. In addition to the actions in the delivery plan, other key initiatives which contribute to the achievement of the framework's strategic objectives continue to be advanced by other departments and agencies with the support from TEO. The collaborations and joined-up approaches catalysed by the framework and delivery plan are strengthening the delivery of relevant strategies. Delivery of these strategies is monitored by departments within their own structures and reported on through the Strategic Framework Oversight Board and the Executive, so that they can get an end-to-end view of the breadth of the work across the civil service. The TEO committee plays a critical role in providing feedback to progress the delivery of the strategic framework, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have today.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your introductory remarks. So when the First Minister and Deputy First Minister were here, I asked them about the research into men and boys' attitudes and behaviours related to violence against women and girls, and I think they'd indicated that this research had been commissioned. Just wondering if you could provide us with an update on that.
I'll give you a broad timeline update and then bring in Ryan, who has seen the first report. So we've received the first report. There is some further work being done in relation to this, but I think it's fair to say that it is proving very fruitful already. Because it is the first study we have had in this jurisdiction of the attitudes of men and boys. Ryan, do you have any more detail?
Yeah, I mean, it's in terms of age group, it's targeted towards 16 to 24-year-olds, and it's really looking again at the attitudes and using that evidence base to inform the future programme. So there's a series of reports in terms of literature reviews to see what evidence is out there already, and then that was built upon with qualitative and quantitative research methods. So there's a number of reports, and the research team at Queen's University are finalising those reports and their recommendations, which will then be fed into future delivery. And with the early recommendations received so far, there is opportunity at the moment to inform the next bystander Power to Change campaign. So already we can see how that, the report is going to be used in that way.
That's good, thank you very much for that. I was going to come on to the Power to Change campaign around active bystanders, and I was just wondering then, just linking those two together, around the targeting of some of the work from the framework in terms of, sports clubs where men are, school groups, etc. I'm just wondering to what degree are you really trying to drill down to identify your core target audience for these messages?
Well, there are two levels of work. There is the general awareness raising across the population, because what we have identified is that there is a basic lack of awareness of what violence against women and girls is, in particular around areas such as coercive control. So in one of the recent YILT studies, it showed that only 16% of 16-year-olds would recognise what coercive control was in their own life. So we are bringing forward another campaign under Head, Shoulders, Knees and Toes, and that will be region-wide. But we will target our training support in that to frontline workers so that they can help people through the toolkit. But equally, there is the Power to Change campaign, which was targeted mainly at men and boys, and really to draw awareness to what can commonly be styled sometimes as banter, and to make people aware of the negative effects that can have. So we've moved through phase 1 of that, and we've now developed phase 2, which is also then being informed by focus groups in conjunction with young people through the Education Authority. And that will help us target the messages towards the age groups which we are looking at. Now, we know, for example, that the results from the Power to Change campaign, the first phase, that the responses on TikTok were mainly from men 18 to 35, and then the YouTube shorts were a slightly older age group. So we know to date how that reach has worked. But as well as that, then there's further development work ongoing in relation to phase 2, and then we will look again in relation to phase 3 of that campaign. One of the things I would like to say on that is that while some of the messaging is targeted towards men and boys, we cannot do this work without the support and help of men and boys, and that what we need to do is to make everyone aware of what a healthy relationship looks like, what are acceptable standards of behaviour, and to bring men in as our allies. That was a key focus in that Part of Change campaign, where you were encouraging men who maybe saw some behaviour which was not helpful to engage with their friends, and because men need to be our allies in this work.
Thank you. So just a final one for me, and that's in terms of very vulnerable women, and I'm talking about maybe sex workers or trans community or women from ethnic minority backgrounds who maybe have a mistrust for one reason or another of a position, people in positions of authority. And I'm just wondering how support is being provided to those women who are probably most marginalised. Thank you.
Well, sort of a few points at the outset on that. As you know, it was part of the mandate from the Assembly and then the Executive that this work should be intersectional. And we always recognised that there were women who were exposed to greater risk and also had bigger barriers to seeking help. We then decided on an approach where we would commission some deep dive work in relation to what their needs were, and that will be led through a process of community-led reviews. We set out in the first delivery plan the intention of where we would put our focus in the first instance, and the first community-led review is actually moving forward in relation to rural women, as I say. But we also recognise that there are specific needs in relation to the migrant community, and we're doing some preliminary work in scoping that review, so that we would hope that that review would move forward this year. That list, we had identified migrant women, rural women, older women, deaf and disabled women. It's not exhaustive, but we had to prioritise, in some way. As and when other issues come up, though, we will revisit that prioritisation and consider what we need to do. I should also say, though, that through the money being brought forward through the Regional Change Funds and through the Local Change Funds, there is work ongoing with particular groups. And in particular, there's a project being brought forward by Bernardo's in relation to young migrants, young asylum seekers and unaccompanied refugees, to enable them to have a broader awareness of violence against women and girls, and the tools to be able to address it. So, I suppose we would say we have a broader watching brief on some of those issues while we're taking immediate action in relation to some others.
Okay, thank you. And just thought of another point added to that, and at a meeting last week with a group of women who, the Happy Women's Group, and made up of asylum seekers and refugees. And well, first of all, I would say the social media post they put up, the trolling and the nastiness that followed from it, from trying to support a group of ethnic minority women, was unbelievable. But one of the issues we were talking about was female genital mutilation, and that is a form of violence against women, or girls, sorry, should I say. And I'm just wondering, in terms of the very wedge, thin end of the wedge in terms of violence against girls, I'm just wondering, is this a piece of work that you are covering through this framework?
Not directly. The intention of the framework is that we do not displace policy or funding remits elsewhere, but we set an overall strategic direction. But within that, through the programme board and the oversight board, we would look to set priorities and drive forward work and act as a catalyst with departments who are responsible for that work. So the lead there is the Department of Health and also then the Department of Justice. And certainly it came up as a significant issue within the co-design process, and it is something that we anticipate will be looked at as part of the community-led review going forward, because clearly it is a need which requires action in that context.
Thank you very much. Go to Carol, please.
Thank you very much. So I'm just going to ask you, because I actually had it down earlier. Charlene, you spoke about a community-led review. If you could expand on that, because so who are your community partners? Are they the people who helped write the initial report, or who are your partners within the community?
It will vary according to community-led reviews. So basically, our stakeholders, more generally, we have an insights and reference network, and that has been a sort of a continuation of those organisations who were involved in the co-design process, but others who we have engaged with as we've moved to implementation, so councils and wider organisations. So that's the broad base against which we operate. But in the community-led review, we would look to sort of leading organisations within a sector. So we've worked with DERA. The community-led review for rural women has been led, as I say, by the Rural Community Network and the Northern Ireland Women's Rural Network. And they are doing a piece of grounding research, and we will liaise with them, and as that moves forward. But the whole ethos underpinning the strategic framework is that you move forward informed by the lived experience of those affected by this, because policy made in the absence of the information of those whose needs you're trying to make will fail. So it's not a one size fits all, but the intention is to go out and seek delivery partners within the sector who are informed but also lived experience. Ryan, is there any? Sorry, I was just going to ask if there's any.
No, I think that's right in terms of how you approach the first one, because it is those two groups who are best placed in that sort of sector, in that community, to get that lived experience through. So what they've initially done is they've got 30 focus groups from women and girls and some young men and boys in rural communities right across, because they are best placed and they have researchers in place to help lead those engagement sessions as well. So we found this is almost a model to see how this works as well, which will help inform the other reviews. But in terms of getting that lived experience from those groups who work with these women day in, day out, so far it seems to be working as a methodology for the rest of them.
So that's great for rural communities. My concern is that particularly working class areas, some of the groups, and they do excellent work, but they're very regional. So how do you get right down to, local youth clubs? And I'm not talking about the big youth service providers, I'm talking about local youth clubs, sports clubs.
I'll say a bit about that, and then I'll bring Finn in, who can give some examples of how we are collaborating through the Local Change Fund. So yes, I mean, this is not about doing everything with the big regional providers. They do have a role, but the Local Change Fund was designed to ensure that we are working with grassroots community organisations. And there I think, 164 projects being rolled out in relation to that. But the intention as we move forward would be to co-opt some of that experience into the community-led reviews. It's very hard for us to sit now and say in the abstract exactly who we will need in one particular project. But I think the closer we get to the grassroots and the more we link in with grassroots voluntary organisations, the better our evidence base will be. So Finn, do you want to say something just about the range of people we're working with?
Just the local groups are all part of the Insights and Reference Network, so they'll be communicated with whenever there's a community-led review that's coming up, and if there's applicable subject matter. But the types of groups, Sterling says there's 164 groups across all council areas, and there's a wide variety between sports clubs, faith organisations, some associated with schools, community organisations, youth clubs, small youth clubs. So the idea behind the grant scheme was that it would have the 3 different tiers. So the first tier...
Sorry to interrupt you, Finn. So is that the first then contact would be from their local development officer at their local council to go out to the groups then? Is that... So who are the Insights and Network or Insights and Reference Network?
The Insights and Reference Network is held by TEO.
Yeah, it's just it's a contact database that we use, and our hope is then that we use that as a two-way tool for engagement. So we've already put out one e-sign, they're sharing information, but we would use that to disseminate information. But also, if we were, say, putting out a call for evidence or a request to partake in a community-led review, we would use that as our first vehicle.
But
I mean, that would not necessarily be the only way that we would do that.
That's fine. I just know, so the experience I've had in North Belfast has been very positive with the council officials, going out to work with local groups, so the sports groups, youth groups. But I'm not convinced that that would be the experience across the board in terms of if the council is the conduit to go out and talk to the groups, if you get a council that mightn't be as proactive.
It's a bit of both.
Okay.
So there would be, I mean, our role is to coordinate and stimulate and direct, and that's central. Now, we do rely heavily on the councils as our delivery partners because they have the local networks.
Yes.
And Finn meets regularly with the councils. Yeah. But if it became apparent to us that we weren't getting as much input in a particular council area, that's the point at which we would raise that with the council, but we would also step in. But we have a wider range of networks than just through the councils as well. But they do have a very good network. But if something seemed to be stalling or not providing us the input we needed, we would act in those circumstances.
And then the last question is the part of change toolkit. So is TO responsible for that? Is it Justice?
It's a collaboration.
Okay.
So it's PSNI, DOJ, ourselves, but also the heavily informed by the youth panels from the Education Authority, because I think what we thought were some nicely phrased questions. When the young people saw it, they thought that they didn't really pass muster. So it's very much a collaboration.
Because the feedback I got was that it wasn't a negative, it was just some of the questions that they were asked weren't written by young people because a young person would put it differently to try and get experiences. And then has TO thought about, you mentioned TikTok and other Snapchat, anyway. But just in terms of reaching, adverts and things like that, is that going to be factored in?
That is being factored in, and the idea, the segmentation of the sort of social media and how we will reach the correct demographics on that is being factored in. I'm surprised to hear what you're saying about the power to change, and we'll follow that up, because we had understood that the input from the young people through the youth panels had actually influenced the wording of the question. So if there are gaps in that, particularly as we're moving to phase 2, we'll want to follow that up.
So the way it was described to me was that the questions were there, but the people who were asking the questions for the news sector put them into more comfortable. So I'm wondering, is it a class issue?
Well, it's certainly something we have to look at.
So would you look at it? Because I know a one size fits all, and it's about reviewing and learning, and you're very open to that. But I think this programme really needs to work, given the number of women who have died, but also the number of young women who are trapped in coercive relationships. That's very, very frightening. So thank you.
Thank you. Anya, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you folks for coming in. I have just one or two questions at the minute, and Carol's question, I'm going to stay on local councils. Has TO received, local councils and the Local Change Fund in particular, have TO received any feedback from councils or even recipients who are delivering projects at a grassroots level?
I'm going to bring Finn in here in a minute, because this is her area of work. Yes, we've received feedback to date. We're monitoring this as we go along. We've received some data in, but not all of it. We've kept the programme under review so that we were aware of some issues which arose, differences in approaches of councils. So sometimes one council would allow something to be paid for under their application to the Change Fund, but others wouldn't, and where that crossed over. So we refined that. So we've tried to be responsive to the feedback in relation to how the scheme has been administered and how successful the schemes are being. As I say, we're still waiting on the data coming in. We have data to about the 30th of September. But on top of that, Finn has regular meetings with each of the local councils, and I think all of next week she's going out to meet the local councils. But one of the things that we have done, which worked very successfully last June, was we had a shared learning event where we brought all of the councils together and we brought the regional providers together. the cross-fertilisation of ideas which came from that was really, really positive. We were supposed to have one there just before Christmas, but for a variety of reasons that's been postponed, but it's our full intention to have another one before the beginning of the summer. And so that's sort of the dual approach we're taking in terms of information sharing between the councils as well as our close liaison with the councils. Finn, do you want to?
Okay. We've also asked the councils as part of the momentum funding this year up until the end of March to hold shared learning and showcase events in each of their areas for the local change fund projects, and that's to enable more awareness of what kind of projects the community groups could run to expand, the kind of the bits of the projects, but also for collaboration within the community organisations on addressing the issue. TEO representatives are attending those shared learning events and engaging with the community directly through those also. And hearing exactly kind of the feedback coming back and forth between community and councils too. We also have engaged directly with some of the larger groups who may have a project in a number of different areas as well, a number of different council areas, so we'll see the breadth of that.
And just in terms of that cross-council approach, is there a specific vehicle for best practice to be shared? Is it shared through TEO and then disseminated down to each council, or are councils actively talking to each other on a one-to-one basis in that space?
Again, it's a bit of both. I think the shared learning event is the main vehicle at this point, but at the same point, if we're aware that one council is doing something which another council would benefit from because they're on the same path, we would put them in contact. But there's a great willingness from councils, is what we have observed, to share the learning. And we want to avoid any reinventing the wheel. There are going to be commonalities between a lot of what councils do, albeit tailored to their local interests and their local needs. But within that, we want to make sure that the basics are shared.
Yeah, there's already been a significant amount of sharing of resources between councils, and that shared learning event that Geraldine referenced in June was a great opportunity for council staff to meet each other and know exactly, a lot of them know each other anyway, but to know who's working specifically on EVOG because it was so new, but also to understand that each council was able to showcase what kind of resources they had developed with the momentum funding in the first time round, and then they have been since shared among other councils to just kind of learn from them and to reuse them and tailor them for their own use. And as Geraldine said, the willingness to do that and to share resources between councils has been fantastic.
Very good. Chair, just one more. In relation to the community-led review, and I am delighted that there is going to be ongoing work now with DERA, RCN and indeed Norwin in this space. And I do obviously sit on the DERA committee as well, but they are developing, DERA is developing a rural community framework, a rural policy framework at the minute. Have EVOG within TEO fed into that at all to date?
Not in this iteration of that, but we collaborate very closely with DERA, so I'm very confident that DERA officials are taking EVOG issues into account. We were actually, when we started off in this work, very surprised as to how many touch points we actually had with DERA in this work, and they have been particularly collaborative. So I would be confident that that EVOG will be taken account of in that context.
I would agree, and DERA were involved as well when we approached the two groups in terms of what the outcomes were meant to be in the specification. So they've been very heavily involved in the start. So they did make us aware of that future policy. Yes. So I have no doubt that it will be fed in, and there'll be further opportunities for us to do that more formally.
Yeah, no, but because I think it's a fantastic, fantastic opportunity, not only for DERA or even for yourselves, but that whole policy area of EVOG. This is going to be a new policy framework that hasn't been updated really from 2016, that will set the future trajectory of policy for rural communities, and in this instance rural women. So it is vital that it is included in it. But thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Pam, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for your attendance at committee today. through my previous role, I know how much work has been invested into this programme and how important it is. And I know it's been very much bought into by local government and all across the board. I think awareness is at an all-time high, but unfortunately we're not yet seemingly seeing the benefits in terms of, you know, reduced numbers, in terms of those stats that you've given us there too, in terms of the Life and Times survey. They were taken within the last year, is that right?
24.
So that's kind of a red flag to me, that for where we are in time, you would think we would be much further ahead in terms of a more sensible thought. So I'm just wondering, I suppose, in terms of future-proofing EVOG, is there any discussion or any looking at where things may change in the future? And I'm thinking of the impact that social media has on young people in particular. I'm thinking about things such as the smartphone-free childhood movement that's happening now, which I think is really positive and could very well be a good tool going forward as well. And also in terms of any potential of future social media bans for under 16s. So are we looking at any of those things, or are we looking or doing any research into you know, where young people in particular are getting the violent thoughts and the negative thoughts and the misogynistic term, that, you know, where's that? Clearly social media and internet will have a big impact on that. So are we looking at a potential of should that reduce or become less or change? Is there somewhere different you want to go?
There are about 10 questions within that, so I'll try to. So starting from the beginning, there's always been a recognition that what we are talking about here in terms of change is going to take some time. But that doesn't mean to say we can't make a measure progress as we go along. Neighbouring jurisdictions are on their second and third iterations of similar strategies. So I think we need to think about in that type of time frame before you see a reduction in the population level indicators. We have always been, the framework is set in such a way that it will evolve, because we know that there are continuous challenges which are arising through, for example, as you point out, technology and technology-enabled abuse. So the methodology which we have established is the idea of embedding the issue within sectors, so that sectors will develop an action plan and therefore keep that action plan under review and feed that as it goes along. So that's the basic premise underpinning the strategic framework. In relation to emerging threats, we do sort of scan the horizon in relation to that, and the recent example of what happened in relation to Grock and our liaison then with the Department of Justice and with the Home Office in relation to the measures which were being taken to address that. More generally, in relation to social media and the threats there, we the Safeguarding Board for Northern Ireland was one of our co-design partners, and we collaborate with them and the Department of Justice in relation to the online safety strategy in relation to children. We also collaborate closely with Ofcom, and we're involved with Ofcom in the consultation to develop their guidance to tech companies on prevention of violence against women and girls. An awful lot of that, of the real measures, legislative measures to deal with that, sit in the reserve space. And through the 5 jurisdictions working group, which is an officials group across the neighbouring jurisdictions, we are considering whether we need to establish a small working group to look at emerging issues in the online space because of its reserved nature, and to learn from each other. The social media ban is something being brought forward by the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, and it is something that we will promote through with our stakeholders. And you know, we're very interested in how that moves forward. in terms of research, that the piece of research which we have just commissioned and got the initial results on what young men and boys in Northern Ireland think is going to be important in relation to that. We're also aware of other research which was commissioned by the Safeguarding Board and UU in relation to technology assisted child sexual abuse, and all of that is sort of brought together through the structures which we have set up, and we will continue to look at that. We are also working with Ofcom in terms of supporting the work that they're doing in relation to media literacy, and also any of the local change fund projects or the regional change fund projects will work in that. But I was going to bring Finn in here as well, because she has an example of some work which has been done, say, in a sports club at countering messages which are coming through social media.
Yeah. So what we're hearing from the community is that the importance, the online stuff is not going to go away. The importance is to bring those conversations into real life and to have those conversations with a trusted adult. So people need the language to have those conversations and the confidence to have those conversations. So, for example, the Fair Game Initiative has a 6-week course, and that's about an hour before a training session starts. And they bring, at the minute, it's young boys, and there'll be a new programme for young girls. And they bring those in, feed them pizza and create a safe space. They start off talking around identities and what that means to you, but they create a safe space where the young men can open up and talk, and then they bring in some of the comments and the influencers that they're following on TikTok, and they talk about the comments and talk about how are the facts, are the real, and how that actually impacts. And it's a safe space to challenge and have the conversations in real life with trusted adults. So that is just one example of what the Change Fund's doing. So there's it kind of brings both young and everybody, the whole of society, to become informed consumers of social media, so that they see that things aren't real, aren't facts, and influencers aren't always to be believed in everything that they say. So
I think just to build on what Finn said as well, through other projects that's already ongoing, such as the Party Change campaign and the All Equal, All Safe resource, which young people developed, it's like a 10-pack resource, and one of the packs is actually around social media. So that's again coming from young people directly in terms of what they would like to discuss and what they want to learn about. So there's real ways that we can actually use the programmes and activities we have to start to look at those issues that young people face in the online world. And that's in addition as well to the online safety strategy that Geraldine mentioned, which will be coming out for a new action plan from 2027.
I should also add that we, along with the Department of Education, are setting up the Healthy Relationships Forum, which is designed to look at how we encourage young people from a very early age right through to probably about the age of 25 to understand what a healthy relationship is and have the tools to deal with it. I would imagine that online in that space is going to be a major factor. And again, the idea of that forum is to bring in the experts and bring in, because we already know DE already sponsors the Safer Schools app and gives parents and young people information about how to be safe online. So yeah, I mean, online is definitely a huge challenge, but we're seeking to learn from what other jurisdictions are doing, collaborate with those who need, and to get in at the grassroots with young people.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Timothy, please.
In the recent budget debate, there has been 6.77 million allocated to ending violence against women and girls. I welcome every penny of that and believe that this is something that we should be investing money in to stop this scourge on society. That said, I want to ensure that that money is being spent wisely. So you have said that 5 million essentially has went to councils. So if we concentrate first of all on the money that TEO has spent without the council element of it, the money that's the police are spending, is that coming from TEO or is that coming from within the justice budget?
Do you mean in relation to the Power to Change campaign or more generally?
Well, This is a flagship policy. So the money that the police are spending on this, is there money being levered in from this 1.something million that TEO have?
Yes, we make so on anything that on anything we're collaborating with the police in relation to the Power to Change campaign, we made a contribution to that campaign and work collaboratively with them in relation to that, and that was on phase 1 and we'll be contributing again in phase 2, and that's a financial contribution but also in terms of officials' time and resource.
When the Youth Council were here, they were very clear that to tackle this problem, and I agree with them, to tackle this problem we need to be getting into schools at an early age. So out of that £1 million that the TEO have we given any money to the Education Department out of that, or are they having to fund that internally from their own budget?
Well, we don't have an action plan yet in relation to the Healthy Relationships Forum, so we'll have to look at what the actions coming out of that and how they are funded. But to date, we have provided money to the Department of Education to part fund a specific dedicated post to work on this, to enable the Healthy Relationships Forum to move forward. We're also collaborating with the Education Authority in relation to the youth panels, and we made a contribution to the Education Authority in relation to that. We're also collaborating, not everything which we are doing, not every collaboration costs money, so we're collaborating with the Department of Justice, CCEA, DOH, DOJ, DE in relation to an education symposium which is going to be held on the 24th of March, where we're bringing together a lot of school leaders and school governors and pupils to look at what needs to be done in the education space.
We're 2 years into this programme. Do you believe that the TEO is the best department still to head up this policy?
Yes. I think if you look at what our role is in relation to this, it is a strategic, coordinating and driving role, leveraging action with other departments and with councils. One of the problems with violence against women and girls is prior to the strategic framework was that it was very often seen to be either a woman's issue or it was a justice issue, and then what had tended to happen is it got siloed, and the need for it to be worked through with every department, and for every department to recognise that all of its policies, from TransLink and transport, DERA and what their vets do when they go out to TB test on a farm, the examples are legion, and TEO is in a solid coordinating space in relation to that.
So to give you a live experience, essentially a lived experience, I had a distraught mother on with me last night from Armagh, where there had been a safeguarding incident that had taken place at a bus station prior to Christmas, where a year 8 pupil signalled to a group of girls, so there were 2 year 8 girls and a year 11 girl, that he was going to rape and kill one of them. So the school rightly suspended that child. The police were involved. The police then diverted that to the Youth Justice Agency, and that child underwent a 6-week programme. That child is going to be taken back into the school, and indeed that male child sat beside the person they were making the threats to. So if TEO is the best vehicle to deliver this programme, can you talk me through how we can make an impact that that's never going to happen again? My concern is that the Board of Governors have taken a decision bringing that child in and haven't taken into consideration the thoughts of the victims, of the 3 young girls that have been emotionally distressed, anxious, not wanting to go back to school. The school have agreed that they will bring that child back with a 1-to-1 with them is that something that there can be money come out of TEO to help support the victims to get counselling, or to ensure that the rest of the pupils in that school will be safe, that when this year 8 male child, who is a newcomer, comes back into this school, that, you know, so I'm looking for outcomes. I'm looking for how your money, the TEO money, is changing this.
Well, few things within that. Can't comment on the actual specific case, but as I said at the outset, that this strategic framework is a framework within which all departments operate. Their existing policy remits and responsibilities, including funding and any sort of criminal justice sanctions, or however that is dealt with by the Youth Justice Agency, isn't displaced. But that doesn't mean to say it isn't informed by the direction of travel and the principles which have been set down in the strategic framework or any collaborative work. The money which we have, I have quite a small sort of pot of baseline funding, and the majority of the funding which we provide is sent out through councils to grassroots community groups, or to the through the regional change fund, to fund EVOG expert organisations continue to run the programmes which are being shown to have effect. Some of that work will be with schools, some of it will be more widely in the workplace, some of it will be in prisons. For example, White Ribbon does a listen, learn, lead work in schools. So that's really how our funding is dispersed. We do not provide funding directly for services. The focus of our work is on prevention, and it's on the raising awareness and giving people the tools and ability to identify VOG and to be able to deal with it. Now, as I referenced the Healthy Educations Forum, the intention is to work then with the education sector. So that would be education providers, school principals, to make them aware of issues surrounding VOG, and that they in turn, with the Education Department, with EAA, with CCEA, with ETI, will look at how that is translated into their environment. So on a couple of levels, I would hope then that the principals would understand the impact of VOG, that at a policy level with EA, that they would then, not with EA, sorry, with the Department of Education, will review their policies for when incidents occur, and that all of that will be informed by VOG best practice.
So this money is to prevent violence against women and girls. So in a case like this, where there has been a crime committed, there has been a safeguarding concern, what help then can the Executive Office give for those victims to ensure that they feel safe going to school? Like, if there was a request come into the TEO office for the school to homeschool this year 8 pupil that made these gestures, is that something TEO would support? Because this is clearly falls under this flagship policy, and if this flagship policy means anything, and we're spending £6.77 million next year, there has to be some outcome, there has to be some value for money where somebody with a lived experience as a victim in all this can get the help and support they deserve.
And that would be delivered through the Department of Education and the Education Authority, who are the experts in education, and our role in relation to this is to work with them to look at the issues and inform best practice.
How much have you given to the Education Department, to the EA?
To EA in relation to the youth panels, I don't have that figure. We can write to you with that, but we are collaborating with them in establishing the youth panels. But a whole point of this is not necessarily that there is new money needed. It is applying an EVOG lens to what they're doing, so that that's an important issue as well. All of our principles are that it should be trauma informed and
victim-centric. But again, how that manifests into a specific issue. But there's other work ongoing with schools. Finn, did you want to come in there?
So a decision that has been taken to reintroduce this pupil back into the school without talking to the parents of the 3 girls involved and without speaking to the victims themselves, surely that's not trauma-informed approach.
As I said, I cannot comment on the action taken by a particular school in a particular instance. The principles for the strategic framework are that they are we take a trauma-informed approach to everything that we do, and that is certainly what we will be promoting through the Healthy Relationships Forum.
So you've mentioned about protecting the migrant community, but because this is a newcomer child, this family believes that they're being protected over the victims in this case. If I can move on to the councils, you've given plenty of percentages with 86% positive in this, 86% increased awareness here, 98% increased knowledge, all good stuff, but you've said that some of the data is in, but there's data still outstanding from the councils.
Yes.
So what is these figures based on?
Well, as I said, they were figures at a point in time of the surveys which we had at that point. They are a snapshot.
Was that 100% of the surveys at that point in time from councils? Of outcomes from the money they have given to projects?
No, they are the surveys of participants who responded to the survey. That's the way surveys work. Survey goes out, not everybody fills it in. So we would have to look at response rates, but we are committed to giving a report to the executive, and we've written to the executive indicating that we will have a full year of data in June, and then that we will provide a full report to the executive on the first year of operation by September. Some of these councils, operationally, the strategic framework was agreed in September 2024. It started to operate in January 2025. We are only in the first year of operation. There are gaps in the data. We've been clear about that. The intention is once we have a full year of data, we will provide a comprehensive report to the executive. We've also committed to an independent mid-term review to check that what we are doing is on the right tracks. There are difficulties in evaluating any preventative measures, as recognised recently by Dame Eilish Angelini in her second report following the Sarah Everard death, in that you're trying to prove a negative. So you're trying to prove that something hasn't happened because of what you have done. There are limited tools to do that. We recognise that there are limited tools in terms of participant awareness and participant action based on that. So we're evaluating that as we go along, and if that's not providing us sufficient data, we will flex and look at what else we can do on that.
So if the outcomes aren't at a certain standard, will you relook at how you allocate the money? So 5 million going to councils, but if councils aren't producing...
It's not 5 million going to councils, it's 5 million going to grants.
Then
2.2 million of that has gone out through the local change fund. 2 million of that has gone to delivery partners, 8 NSPCC, Bernardo's, Nexus, Relate, White Ribbon, WRDA, Women's Aid. So some of that money has gone to them. It is administered through BCC, but it goes to the regional providers.
So when we look at Belfast and some of the groups that they have supported, it's been flagged as a concern with me that some of the groups they are supporting are groups that support transgender women, and that has been flagged. I have flagged this before, that this was produced without any gender critics being involved, and now we have a council openly admitting that some of the groups that they have funded include trans women. Is that a concern for you at all? So this is about ending violence against women and girls.
Yes, and the focus of the strategy is on violence which is has its roots in gender inequality,
and any of the groups who apply for funding have to show that they meet the preventative aims within that. And we operate within a wider spectrum of equality legislation and human rights responsibilities and duties.
And have you collected any data from the councils of what groups they are supporting and how many of them may be ones that include transgender women?
We don't collect data at that level. We collect data on, as part of the letter of offer, a council is required to get participants to indicate certain demographics, but we don't collect data on at that level.
Demographics do you collect the data on?
Finn, are you able to?
Men, women, and neither, or I'd rather not say, would be the category that's relevant at the minute. But we would also capture postcodes, would capture ethnic background, and there's others, but it's just the standard demographics that would be collected in any TEO grant programme.
Out of curiosity, so you've said men, women, neither. Is that correct? Did I hear that right?
That's the boxes to tick on the form.
What group's that? What is neither? Biologically, biology dictates you're a man or a woman, so what is neither?
It's the recommendation from the statisticians.
Yeah, we're following NISRA guidance.
You can't tell me what neither is?
They've explained why it's people will complete these forms themselves, so it's how they will identify. So they are filling the forms out in terms of these feedback
I
forms.
would usually prefer not to say and all that on it.
I've major concerns regarding the money that is spent in this, and I agree with every penny that's been spent as I started off my contribution, but I'm concerned of the outputs from that, and I don't believe that councils in every case are the best vehicle for doing that. I think TEO, if they're going to lead up the strategy, should be the ones approving the grants, getting it to grassroots, so we have more control over it, so we can collect the data instead of waiting on data coming from local councils. All the figures you've given are positive, but at the same time, when you start to drill down into that, there's obviously councils haven't come back, groups haven't come back, and so when you're talking about 98% increased knowledge, how many people is that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. And there are questions we've asked ourselves. They are given as a snapshot, early doors, on an initiative which has really only been running since last January. But what I have tried to stress is that when we get the full data in, we have to take that back through the programme board, back through the oversight board, and then up to the executive. That can be reviewed. Not only that, we have committed to an independent mid-term review to make sure that we are on the right track. Council partners have been very effective in leveraging their networks, their local needs, their administrative arrangements. If TEO was to start to do that, there would be a significant cost involved in that, and we would not, central government does not have that reach into local communities. Also in terms of the grant and the grant applications, TEO sets the criteria by which the councils will adjudicate. TEO officials also help on the assessment panels, and it's TEO who makes the adjudication in relation to the Regional Change Fund.
Okay, so thank you very much for your contribution today. Really appreciate it, and the work you're doing in terms of getting this strategic framework delivered. So if there's any other reports in the future, please send them through and we'll make sure that they're shared with all the committee members. But thank you for now.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, members, will we maybe do a recap of actions, please, Clark?
Yes, thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Most of it is more actually follow-up in terms of things that the department are going to provide us, but actions, I think it might be worth writing to the department asking about further information on the detail of the first study and report into attitudes of men and boys that they have received. I don't know whether that has been cleared to be published, but we can certainly ask the question whether we can have a copy of that. And then the only other action I had perhaps for us was a breakdown of funding to providers, because at the minute we only have high level amounts, and if members were interested in finding out a little bit more as to how those have actually broken down either per council or per provider, where the department can give that. That's something that the members may wish to be interested in. In terms of follow-up, the department committed to coming back in relation to the Power to Change campaign. Also, they did commit to coming back in funding to different types of bodies, which is slightly different to the breakdown of funding to providers, and that they also said they would come back on an update on their next shared learning event for councils around the councils actually talking to each other and finding out their best practice. I think one had to be cancelled last year, so that we are planning to do another one, and they said they would come back with the findings of that.
Okay, go ahead, please.
So, can I suggest we also write to PSNI and ask, in terms of ending violence against women and girls, how many records or statistics do they have of violence, either threats made against women, actual violence made against women, and the breakdown of the offenders? Because this constant nonsense about trans people are violent, I think, is factually incorrect. Apart from being offensive, it's factually incorrect. Most of the, as far as I'm aware, and that's why I want to get the statistics, most of the violence against women and girls is committed by white men. So I think it would be good just to get that sorted.
Thank you. So I just had one other suggestion, and I think it's maybe for the Strategic Away Day, and it's I think we've all been to projects in our constituencies where there's been some really good work showcased, and I just wonder maybe in one of the panel sessions in the autumn we could maybe invite some of the recipient groups to sort of spell out the sort of work that they are involved in. And the
sorry, and then it said that the funding broke down was like 2.5 million went to regional groups. So you've got the regional and the local change fund. I think it'd be worthwhile getting a breakdown of all the recipients.
Yes, that breakdown of funding to all providers, because we only got very high level amounts there. Chair, just before you come on to the other thing there, just in terms of, and this harkens back to my business office days, it might be that it's DOF we need to speak to in terms of stats on
I think it comes through
NISRA. Well, which is DOF as opposed to, but we'll sort that bit out and write to the relevant bit.
okay.
Sorry, Anya,
Please go ahead.
Just quickly, from me, I think it was just before Christmas or last sitting before Christmas, I had asked could we invite the police ombudsman's office in. Obviously there was seriously worrying figures released yesterday in relation to 30% of all serious cases that the ombudsman's office are investigating are related to sexual purposes offences. So have we got a date for that yet at all?
Anya, we did write to the Ombudsman after you brought that up last time. It's actually just came in yesterday, that report and correspondence from the Ombudsman's office, which will be in the pack on Friday. So next week when the members consider that, we could look at actions following up from it then.
No, I would certainly support that. Okay, go ahead please.
So we heard that there was data that will be coming at different periodic times. Could we write to them and ask them for a timeline of when we can expect that, when they'll have a full year of results? I think that's something that'd be very helpful.
No problem.
Okay, members, we're going to move on then. So item 8 then, a written briefing from the Migrants' Rights Network in terms of immigration raids in Northern Ireland, and I'm going to refer you to pages 167 to 172 of your pack for a written briefing. So just to advise that the written briefing from Migrants' Rights Network examines how immigration raids operate across the United Kingdom, including the impact on radicalised migrant and migrative communities in Belfast, as well as in other hotspot areas such as London, Birkenhead and Dover. While Belfast accounted for 60.9% of immigration raids throughout the same time periods examined, them being January 2018 to September 2019 and January 2022 to May 2025. The BT3 area within Belfast has seen by far the highest number of immigration raids, and this is broken down further in the paper provided. So I'm just wondering if anybody has any views on the information provided. Go ahead.
Obviously, this is intelligence-led, and if there wasn't an issue, the raids wouldn't be carried out. Can we get somebody to speak to this, either from this group or the PSNI, or both?
Yeah, I think it's worth. I think that they did reach out. I know a lot of political parties engaged with them, and I think they alluded to that in their written briefings. So, but I'm happy for that to be examined in a public arena like committee here. So I'm happy for us to write. Are members in agreement with that?
That's grand. Yeah, no
Okay,
problem. Thank you.
Okay. Any other actions? Maybe did you suggest the PSNI as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
In terms of this written,
Well, it's a case of they're obviously playing a part in the raids and gathering the intelligence, and it would be interesting to get their perspective on it. Obviously, if the big end of this is happening in Belfast, there's a concern there that is intelligence led. So I think it'd be a worthwhile evidence session.
Yeah, and I suppose when you read the section of the report there in terms of the common themes raised by the groups, and they said that the history of policing and connections with paramilitarism in the north of Ireland / Northern Ireland mean that many people don't necessarily understand they have rights and know that their rights, know what their rights are when they're stopped by the PSNI. I suppose that's quite a large claim, and I think that that's possibly something that we could raise with them then, just to see what their thoughts are in terms of that aspect of the report. So maybe when you're inviting them, then you could supply them with this report so they can prepare for that question.
no problem. That's fine.
Okay.
We have lost decision-making quorum here now, but so we can move on to correspondence. We can outline the correspondence. We can't seek agreement on any actions at this stage, or we can just suspend for a couple of minutes until Anya returns, which may be the better way to
We'll
do
suspend.
things.
Are
if
members
that's all right.
okay that we suspend for a couple of minutes? I don't think she realised. Thank you. Members, we're back in open session. I'm just going to move on to item 9, correspondence, and refer you to pages 174 to 176 of your pack for a summary of committee correspondence. And I'm just going to bring to your attention one item of business, and that's 9.9, Committee for Finance, outturn and forecast outturn for 2025-26. So I'm going to refer you to pages 339 to 384 of your pack, and just to advise that the committee has received correspondence from the Committee for Finance regarding the 2025-26 public expenditure outturn and forecast outturn January position, and just seek your agreement to note this item and agree to write to the department to ask for further information around the £1.2 million capital DEL reduction regarding the timing of Urban Villages capital grant spend. I would really like, just on that item, I would like maybe a breakdown in that regard. Obviously, I have an interest in my constituency of the 3 large-scale capital projects under Urban Villages, and I'd just like to find out more information about that. Okay, so I'm just going to ask the clerk to read some items onto the record, please. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Item 9.2, members, is a news release from the Department. First Minister and Deputy First Minister unveil memorial plaque for victims and survivors of historical institutional abuse. Item 9.3 is ISNI Investing Activity Report for February 2026 for members to note. Item 9.4 was the Hansard for the committee session for strategy for victims and survivors of the Troubles, including Bridge of Hope, Eli Centre, Relatives for Justice, SEF and WAVE Trauma Centre on the 18th of February 2026. Item 9.5 is then the following Hansard report for the TEO briefing session on the same day. Item 9.6 is a renewed partnership agreement between the Department and the Maze Long-Kesh Development Corporation for members to note. Item 9.7 is from the Northern Ireland Fiscal Council and is an assessment of the Finance Minister's proposed 26 to 27 and then 28, 29 to 29, 30 budget. And item 9.8 is from the Committee for Communities and is around social housing development programme.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody want to raise anything in relation to any of this? No. Okay, moving on then. So, draft forward work programme, refer you to pages 386 to 388 of the pack. I'm going to ask the Assistant Clerk to go through any changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So just in relation to next week's meeting, members will hear from representatives of the Cross-Denominational Network of Survivors, Dromore Group and Amnesty International in relation to historical clerical child abuse. And then we'll have a second session from departmental officials on the TO research and recommendations, and that will be in closed session. And then the third briefing will be on the programme for government and the PFG delivery unit with department officials as well.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to maybe speak to the fact you have raised with the DALO around the research reports, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So as members will be aware, the 3 reports have not been published as of yet, and my understanding is that by the time we actually get to the evidence sessions next week, they will not have been published, which obviously is not ideal for the committee when they will be hearing from victims groups, but haven't got an indication of what the reports say. My understanding is we've raised it with the department a number of times in the last number of weeks to try and get some forward movement on it before the committee looks at it. My understanding is that it is a ministerial decision that hasn't happened. Hence, the evidence session with officials next week will be in closed session to allow officials to be perhaps more open than they would be allowed to be if it was in open session.
Timing.
Yeah. But it is something we have raised.
We could then, after the hearing with the officials in closed session, and when we get an indication if and when the reports are published, we could do it again. Yeah, do it again, couldn't you? Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that, and thanks for your work on it. So, any other business members?
Yeah, could I raise something?
Go ahead.
I want to raise the event that took place in Stormont yesterday. This committee has scrutiny responsibilities under the Identity and Language Northern Ireland Act 2022, and there's a comment made yesterday: every word spoken against Irish language could be seen as another blow struck in the cause of Irish unification. So that was said in this very building yesterday by Mr. Paul Deeds, who comes under the responsibility of this committee. When his role was set up, it wasn't set up to be a political advocate. It wasn't set up to enter constitutional debates. And I very much feel that he has stepped outside his remit, and it's up to this committee to remind Mr. Deeds of what his remit is and his Irish language role. I think it would be right and proper that we would invite him to the committee, essentially to question him on that and to ensure that he understands what his role is under the 2022 Act. I want to explore how his office will remain politically neutral. I understand, yes, he is due to come here in the near future, but based on what he said very publicly yesterday, this committee at the very least should be writing to him to make him aware concerns have been raised and remind him what his responsibilities are under the legislation.
Anybody else on anything on that?
I think it's down to the First and Deputy First Minister to remind anybody, they're the employees. I think the quote was in relation to some of the negativity around the Irish language. So the full quote, because I heard, are you talking about hearing it on the news this morning?
Yes.
Aye, so I heard, I don't know, I heard the news this morning, I think it was before 7, and it was broader than what you said. So I think it would be helpful if we could get a transcript. But either way, we're not the employers of the commissioners.
We are the scrutiny body.
We are the scrutiny body, but to get someone in, you know.
Okay, so just for confirmation then, so the two commissioners and the director of the Office of Identity and Cultural Expression, they are before us on the 18th, so 2 weeks today.
After, is it not after? It's after Easter, isn't it?
No,
before Easter.
2 weeks' time.
2 weeks' time.
Right, great.
So that will be our opportunity to scrutinise them, and I'm sure he will anticipate a question from you, Timothy, and possibly others on that. I suppose, to pick up on Carol's point, I think that there's obviously the avenue in terms of written questions to the Executive Office in the meantime to see if they have any thoughts on this, or if they are planning to take any action under his contract. So Go ahead, please.
And Chair, could we get the transcript from?
Yeah, no, I
the-
think that's fair. I think that's fair enough, so we're all prepared for the meeting.
Yeah, because no doubt it will come up on the 18th.
Yeah, I
Okay,
wasn't at the
and it
event.
should.
I wasn't able to make it, so I didn't hear it either.
Sorry, is it the transcript of the media interview, or is it the transcript of what was said yesterday?
I think you're better getting both
Right. That's
for
fine.
for completeness.
Okay.
Do we know
God
whether,
bless you.
sorry Timothy, so do we know whether somebody will have actually, was it being recorded, live
I-
streamed?
We'll have to find out.
Okay.
I must admit I don't know that, but
somebody's
leave that with
obviously
us.
picked up on
yeah,
it.
we'll
I think-
find that out.
Okay.
Can we be clear what our role is? So essentially, he's coming in to give evidence to this committee.
Yes.
Yes, he, as line manager, might be the First Minister and Deputy First Minister, but we need to be very clear of what our responsibility is in his role and ensuring that he sticks to the guidelines of what he has been employed under. To start to go into a political debate, his office is already under heavy scrutiny, and there's a lot within unionism, including myself, are very suspicious of the work he is trying to undertake. And his comments yesterday just add to that it's hostile, he's driving a political agenda, and somebody has to have the power somewhere to ensure he sticks within his remit.
I don't think that's strictly our remit. I think it is to scrutinise his work, but I think that, as we've seen in some previous sessions, there'll be a degree of latitude in terms of the questioning of him. So, look, I think maybe, Claire, can you maybe take this away and look at it and speak to some of your colleagues around some of the suggested remit of our scrutiny role in that space.
Ask the Dallo just for guidance on the
Yeah.
commissioners as well,
Yes.
and the director.
Leave that with me, Chair.
Is everybody
I'll-
okay
I'll,
with that then? We'll leave
Yeah,
it with
sure.
the clerk.
I'll bring something back before the 18th.
Any other business?
That's fine.
No. Okay,
That's great.
next meeting is next Wednesday, the 11th of March, 2 p.m. in this room 30. I'm just going to say the meeting's adjourned. Thank you.